Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Greg, the single guy, and Matt, the family guy. We're recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you. Well, I'd like to welcome our guest right now. He's coming to us from the U.S., and Tony Deprato is not new to the scene. He has been overseas in several countries. You've been in Korea, Shanghai, and Dubai, as well as teaching in the States. And I'd like to welcome Tony Deprato to the show. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, Tony, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now? You're back in the States after going overseas. You're teaching right now?
Well, I'm not teaching. I'm a chief technology officer, or usually overseas, they call it a director of technology. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm full administrative here. I don't do any teaching at all in the U.S., just all the phone stuff, like managing all the things no one wants to talk about and all the things that are boring.
Yeah, I have a problem with my printer. Can you help me out, please?
Yes, I can help anybody with any printer. So if you have a printer problem, this is what you need to remember. First, you always want to choose the best tool for the job. The best tool is always a hammer, and anything can be a hammer. So those are the rules for fixing printers.
That scene from Office Space, you take it out in the middle of a field, and I'm sure you posted that up around a couple printers overseas like I have.
Yes. Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about your history and what got you into international teaching? You were overseas for several years.
Sure. Before I got into international teaching, I actually did professional level video production and multimedia production. So what that meant is back in the day, I used to make like programmable CDs and DVDs and stuff. I did a variety of like freelance work, and I was kind of on the edge of when streaming on the internet started. So I was like streaming stuff in like 1999, which was hard, really, really hard. So anyway, I basically was like working nonstop for like 3 years, and I'd finished my master's degree when I was burnout, and I'd always wanted to travel, and I always wanted to actually go to Japan because I'd worked with an exchange program for a long time. So the first thing I actually did was I moved to Japan and started working, and not in an international school. I just worked constantly. I had multiple jobs. I did a lot of weird jobs because I wanted to study Japanese. So I studied Japanese for 3 years and worked, and eventually I was working in public schools there, which was strange, and still doing tech work on the side. So I had all these weird tech contracts I was doing, and then teaching in public schools. And I had a friend I did my master's degree with, and he was like, you really should just work in the international school scene if you want to stay overseas. And I was like, well, what's that? So he explained it all to me, and I got hooked up with Search Associates. I was not like a good international school candidate. I didn't, even back then, even with a decent skill set, one of those skills was not making a resume. Like, I couldn't present myself well. I mean, I was like, if you just skipped everything that I wrote and read what I could do, you would be like, oh yeah. But if you read anything, I was just all over the place, completely disorganized. So I don't know anything about recruitment. And in July, which obviously means no one has taken a job, right? It's like a job that can't be filled. Some school in Dubai reached out to me, and they're like, hey, would you be interested in moving to Dubai and helping us build a secondary school, like IT department and curriculum? I talked to the principal on the phone. He's like, look, we need to do programming, robotics. We need to do all kinds of weird stuff. And you have a lot of weird stuff on your resume. He's like, we don't want to teach word processing or PowerPoint. We want to get into some of this other stuff because we are trying to expand the school, and we need something that's attractive to parents. And I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. So then I just literally looked Dubai up on like an image search. I'm like, oh, the beach is really close. I'm in. So that's really the level of decision making I had kind of back then. So that's kind of how it started.
Isn't it interesting that a lot of us, I mean, I'm just like you. When I heard about international, somebody had said, go to Iowa. I'm like, what? What do you mean go to Iowa? And then they were talking about the fair that's in Iowa, the UNI fair. And you're talking about Search Associates. And someone's like, check out search. You're like, what's that? Or what are these international schools? And you were even over in Japan around international schools. You didn't even know it probably, right? Because it's like the best little kept secret.
That's correct.
So you spent time in Dubai and you actually went into IT director and you did some comp sci teaching and all that kind of jazz.
Then from Dubai, I ended up in Shanghai. And that was actually, even after all that time, the situation was exactly the same. I was in my car in Dubai and I just left a conference. American School in Dubai had a big conference. I just left it. I was in my car and my phone rang. And this guy was like, "Hey, this is so-and-so. I'm like the head of school at a new school in Shanghai. We're building out our boarding school and we need somebody that has some really like weird skills because we have all of these challenges." And he was straight with me. He's like, "Nobody really wants this job." He's like, "It's going to be tough." And I was like, "Well, I've never really thought about moving to China." And he's like, "Well, I understand that, but we should really talk." And he's like, "If you want to be on the forefront of like the next generation of what's going to happen on our planet, then you need to understand China. So if you want to understand China, then you should come work at this school." And then he explained the whole setup and the school is incredibly unique. It's still unique today, the way that it was built. But I didn't even realize I was at the first like officially licensed foreign curriculum school in the country till I got there. And there was like we were like inspected all the time, just like audited constantly. I'm like, "Why are these people here all the time?" They're like, "Well, we're an experimental school and the government can shut us down at any point." I'm like, "What? Why am I working here if we're just going to get shut down at any point?" And I'm like, no, we're not going to get shut down, but they're watching everything that we're doing because we're implementing the IB program and we don't have any restrictions. That was the thing, like no restrictions. And it's not a testing school. People aren't coming here to take exams, like Cambridge exams and stuff. He's like, "It's not that. Like, it's an IB school and you can send your kids from anywhere in China to our boarding school." And we even had foreign kids who came to the boarding school to do IB with the Chinese kids. So it was a really weird, very complex, like from a technology standpoint, incredibly complex, similar to what you would face in Saudi, I'm sure with content restrictions and internet restrictions, but on a different level because of the government, like the direct government oversight. So right. No compound level kind of protection like you might get in the Middle East, where you've got a little bit of a slice of not being restricted.
Right.
So anyway, that was super challenging, but that's actually how it happened. I was just in my car. I took a phone call and he was really honest with me about, the fact that the job would probably be awful to start with. It would be really tough. And there were all these challenges and like no other candidates really wanted to do it.
So question for you, 2 questions. Number 1, was it horrible to begin with? Was he right about that?
You know, it wasn't horrible because my wife and I really like embraced it. I mean, we, this is kind of a hilarious story. And if you've been in China, like, especially if your HR department is all Chinese, which most of them are, you have to learn eventually like the subtleties of how things are presented. And I'm not taking a shot at anybody. Like, it's just one of these things where there's a cultural difference in how we communicate and what we ask for and what we're presented with. So we show up and they're like, "Okay, basically you had like in our situation, we could rent any apartment that we wanted. And at the time, the way that it worked, it's different now. The school would just give you money, but you still had to go through a real estate agent and rent an apartment." So we actually found an apartment in like 48 hours. That was easy. But then the agent was like, "If you want this apartment, these people aren't moving out for like three and a half weeks. So you're going to have to stay somewhere." And I'm like, okay. So we asked the school and the school was just like, "There's the hotel just down the street from the school. You can stay there." So we're just thinking, okay, that's where we have to stay. This hotel was like really horrible. It just happened to be close to the school. And the only reason they recommended it was they didn't want us to get lost. But we could have used our hotel money and stayed at any hotel. So anyway, that took us like 2 weeks to figure out. And then we actually found a really nice place to stay for the last like kind of week and a half. But this is what's great about that experience. The hotel was so bad that we only slept in the hotel. So after work every day, we just went out. So in 2 weeks, we had literally carved up probably 25% of the city, like subways, neighborhoods. We're just like, the weather was good. It was fall. So I'm like, if we hate the hotel, let's just not go to the hotel until we have to. Right. So these like weird experiences happened. And then some of the stuff with the HR too, I started to making like mental notes about, all right, if you want to be more successful at your school, especially with like your contracts and your HR and all of that, you need to start like zooming out and not making any assumptions about how anything works, like at all, like zero assumptions. And it was kind of eye opening, especially when my wife was like, man, we could have been staying here the whole time, but we were staying there. I'm like, yeah, because we didn't ask. We just didn't ask, and we were just trying to be polite. So anyway, the job itself was really tough. I mean, we had to do a complete rebuild and redesign of the network and how it worked. So my first meeting with the faculty really was, they're all together, and I'm like, I've done a full assessment, and here's the situation. It's going to take us 6 months to get to a point where you're feeling better. And it's going to take us a full year after that to get to a point where you're feeling like this is the technology that you need. So I laid it out, a year and a half journey. And I'm like, between now and 6 months, here's what we can do to make it better, but there's very little we can do. And then once we hit that 6 month point though, you're going to feel it and you're going to be like, okay, this is an improvement. And a lot of it was connected to contracts the school had, budgets. We had to order equipment. There was a lot of stuff that just had to be done. We needed some new vendors. All the kind of infrastructural stuff had to be done first. So anyway, that was kind of tough, but I thought that like presenting that openly, like I'm not a miracle worker. Like I know what we have to do, but there's a finite number of people to do it, and there's a budget, and I need to explain this in detail to people, including our regulatory authorities who are regulating our bandwidth and stuff, which that took 3 or 4 meetings. All that has to be in person. The first 2 meetings aren't even anything. They're just chatting and getting to know each other. So there's a lot of kind of delay. And so you kind of build up that frustration. And then at the same time, while we're going through this, I'm building out the school's Power School, which I know that they're going to have to use the next year. So I'm building this Power School instance out. So I'm actually trying to get everything ready, because at this stage, like if I were to deploy Power School, it wouldn't even run, like not properly. So like we're doing all this stuff simultaneously. So that first year was one of the busiest kind of years of my life. I worked through, because of the Chinese New Year, it was a very long holiday. I actually worked through the Christmas holiday, which my wife didn't like. I'm like, you can take a trip if you want to, but we're not going to meet this deadline in 12 months if I don't get this work done. So anyway, that was good. But then after things were together, we were able to start focusing on curriculum and robotics, and there were 50 kids who formed an engineering club, and they just wanted to build stuff all the time. So, teachers were able to work with like local suppliers and build VR systems and develop like a completely new way to work with the lower school kids, like in total, like in big grade levels instead of individual classes. So there's a payoff at the end, but getting there, sometimes it just feels like you're like in the desert in a truck with like all the air out of your tires, and you're just barely kind of rolling through the dunes and hoping that you get to the other side. It's kind of like that feeling, like I'm moving, but am I really moving? So that's how it was, but it wasn't that bad. I think a lot of people didn't want to take the job because there were just so many unknowns. I mean, the school wanted to build a boarding school, and the government said, you know what, we'll give you this license, but you're going to have to use another school that we built that no one wants to move into. Who wants to walk into that? It's like, can you imagine that? You have the money, you're ready to build a school, and you have a good design, but we have a school that nobody wants. So that's where you're going to have to go.
So you had to do that for a couple months, at least 6 months to a year after that, when you got there, and while they're building up the new school. Huh?
Well, the new school was mostly open when we got there, but so imagine that it's built but not configured. So every space had to be reconfigured or configured. The only thing that was fully configured was the cafeteria and the library. Everything else, from the time I got there until I left, I think every single part of that school was rebuilt or reconfigured in some way.
Yeah, I've got a school in Switzerland. I can empathize with you because my school in Switzerland I used to work for. I've got a good buddy that's still there, and he's in tech and helping with the infrastructure stuff there. And he wasn't even hired officially as tech. He's just one of those guys that can handle all these kinds of problems and et cetera. And they're opening a new school in Portugal, but they're using an old building that someone else had, and they're slowly, and he's like, what a nightmare. I can't imagine doing that. I wouldn't step into that. I guess that was just one of my, I didn't have a challenge like that in front of me. So kudos to you for taking that over. And if it's working now, it's still working. My other question is this. So the guy tried to get you into this job by saying, number one, and nobody else wants it, but he also said, come to China because this is where it's all happening. Do you agree with that statement after even working there for so many years? And that was the where all that cutting edge stuff was?
I do. I mean, it was an amazing learning experience for me, but my actual skill set probably quadrupled when I was in China. Like, I was doing all kinds of different things all the time at a very high level. And I was working with good engineers, which is, when you work with a good team of people, it makes a big difference in how you develop professionally. And when we would go to conferences and have meetings, everybody was there. I mean, you would go to a conference, there would be like 70, 80 schools and administrators and people who do your job there. And so you didn't even have to leave the country, and you had access to like some of the best people like on the planet in their fields and what they were doing. And that was really amazing. So yeah, I completely agree with that position and that stance.
When I can relate to this, and I love talking to you, hearing somebody else talk about a lot of this, because for me, in my history, I was in Cambodia for a couple of years as a tech for elementary, part of a tech team. They sent a lot of us up to Shanghai at the Community International School, which was like 3,000 students, if I remember right. And this is right around
pretty big.
Yeah. And everything's bigger in China, right? They have more kids that graduate than we even have students in the United States. Yeah. You hear all those stories about how big China is. And I remember going to that conference. We went for about a week, and we just hung out with other international teachers that we knew and played poker at night and stuff like that. But the conference was huge. And since then, I even work now with one of the guys that set up that entire conference at that school. But I remember so many ed tech and other teachers from all different fields going to that conference for learning technology. And I remember it was like, I can't even remember his name. We had a couple of guest speakers. The keynote speakers were really big at the time. And it was about discussion boards, and it was about wet paint, a bunch of other things. 2008, hard to remember that far back. But it was astounding at how many different people were in that field that we could talk about tech. We could talk about smart boards. We could talk about printer servers. We could talk about a lot of things. And it was China, and I remember going to China, and my buddy and I, we had never been there before. So we walked from our hotel. Like you were saying, we're at a hotel close by. We go to the hotel, we walk over, we're going to get some food on the way to the high school. And we stop in, we're like, oh, let's just choose a restaurant. We go in there, there's like 300 pages in their menu. There's not a Westerner to see anywhere. And you go in there and we're just pointing at the food. And I figured we'd get a couple beers or something, but we'd get some rice with it. We don't speak any Chinese. There's no English around us that we could see. And nobody is offering any help. So we both point at like 3 meals. So a total 3 meals. So we could try it out, pictures, each have a beer, and we were waiting and no rice. And at some point we're like, what do we, the rice never came to us. And we're like, waiting. We're like, what? We're in China. We need some rice. It's totally like generalizing, but everybody else had rice on their table. So I guess we had to ask for it. So we just sort of, mimed it with our fingers, trying to like get rice. And the guy looks at us, smiles, and brings it right over. But it was just one of those stories that I can remember. And also going into the subway system. And we went to some kind of a market in Shanghai. You probably know what it is, but it was like this market at one of the subways. And we were going to look for Hawaiian shirts or something.
It's like the fake market. It's at the subway, or it's actually, a lot of people call it the fake market, but I would call it more of a gray market, because a lot of it is the overproduced items that people aren't supposed to be reselling. So they're authentic. They're just overproduced.
Yeah, it was those Hawaiian shirts, and the guy I was with was like an extra large guy. And we remember the women there at this market would just pull us into their stalls, right? And he's a relatively big guy, but he just got yanked into the stall. And he's like, Greg, I forgot to tell you about that. They're sort of aggressive at this market, I heard. And it was a lot of fun. We went looking for specific shirts and had a great time, but we learned a lot in China. It was a good experience, but only like 5 days. So I can imagine you being there for so long that you could learn a lot. There's a variety of things that were thrown at you at the same time, but you're probably at your best when you're challenged. Wow, China. Yeah, Shanghai. All right. Let's take a moment break for a little contact information. We'll be back in 5 seconds.
If you want to give us a little shout out and reach out, you can find us on Gmail at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, complaints can be addressed to Greg, the single guy. And we are also on Instagram, ITP Expats. You can find us.
And then you went to Korea after that, right?
Yeah. So the Korea story is almost exactly like the China story. So I'm out with my wife. We're having dinner. My buddy calls me. He's a CPA and a business manager. I knew him from Dubai. We didn't work together. I worked with his wife. He called me and he's like, "Hey, Tony, we're building the new school in Korea. Are you in?" And he's like, "We got to have somebody come over and set all this stuff up." And he's like, "I don't even know." He's like, "I don't know if the buildings will be ready before the teachers arrive." And so he was really close by. So I'm like, "How about I fly over?" And they had an email issue anyway. They didn't really have a tech department. And they'd set up their email wrong. And so they had like 8 people working, like kind of as a front team setting everything up. But you need communication. So I went over actually on a weekend and redid their email for them. And then he showed me the plan and stuff, and I met the head of school. So that's just kind of how that happened. I was like, yeah, this will be interesting. And that job, I did the technology management, and I was the high school vice principal for 2 years, like kind of doing it all together and training everybody on Power School. And so it was another like phone calls and, "Hey, are you interested in this?" So I guess like one thing I try to like reiterate to people is like, if you look at what I've been doing and how I've gotten there, and some people might think these are, like, why would you go work at these places? These are really horrible choices. Everybody has their view on things. I'm not obsessed with money, but I had certain targets I wanted to hit. So these jobs like hit all of those targets, probably because they were challenging. But in terms of like what the job offers, like in terms of salary, benefits, whatever, all the jobs hit what I was looking for. So I had that in my head. I knew what range I wanted to be at. But with all these jobs, there's one thing in common is all these jobs kind of came to me through people. They didn't really come to me being on social media and talking to people that I don't know. Every single person that called me either because they knew me or someone I knew them. Even the person in Dubai who called me, I was working with like somebody at Search Associates, and I don't know how any of this stuff works. So I skip all the email stuff and I just set up like a big phone call with my agent. And I don't know how often search agents talk to people versus just emailing them. I don't really know. So I'm just telling this lady my story, and I'm like, I don't really think I have a chance to get into a school as a normal person. Like, I'm not a normal candidate, and I don't really know how to present that out. And she was like, there's a couple of people I know who are looking for people. And if you're willing to start like in August on short notice, I'm going to make some phone calls. So that's how that happened. It wasn't that I was emailing people around. It's that I reached out to somebody, laid my case out, she's looking at her list of clients and saying, okay, he's a good fit for these two. She makes some phone calls and they call me. And once that happens, you skip a lot of barriers, I think. And once you get that introduction, and that's kind of what I try to convey to people. Like, it's not really about like randomly chatting to people that you don't know. It's more about trying to build a couple of core relationships and targeting jobs that you want. Like, go after what you want, not just what's, necessarily given to you. And if you get random offers, which always happens to me, as long as those offers meet your goals, it shouldn't really matter, right? But a lot of people get hung up. They're like, well, this job seems great. The head of school seems great. The job meets all of my goals, checks all my boxes, but I read one review on International School Review, so I'm not going to follow up.
I hate that. Oh,
I know. I get that all the time, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Do you know how many people have worked at that school in the last 10 years? Like, and how many reviews are there, And I actually stopped having those discussions, and that's why I kind of got off social media a while ago, because I'm like, I'm not getting anywhere like trying to convey this information to people. Like, everybody has their own opinions. So I'm just going to try to give people a low cost way to get information and maybe like posting stuff that I only really cycle stuff. Like, I don't really recycle things unless the job is on there like a month later, wherever I'm pulling it from. So it's kind of like I'm trying to create like some kind of opportunistic like interconnection where a person is literally just looking at a list that day and they respond that day, and that's how they make the connection. Because I think that's more likely than sitting there searching databases and sending like 50 emails. I think you're looking at a list and this job just speaks to you out of nowhere, and then you just reach out and touch that like school. And I feel like that is how it should happen. So that's the whole like emphasis of my newsletter, is that it's kind of a one-off. It's either there or it's not, and you just move on.
And so just so people connect with this, what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at basically a website. Most of you would call it a website. This is Tony Deprato is in charge of the Pancake on a Stick. And I came across this probably a year ago. Maybe even earlier than that, maybe 2 years. And you can tell right away he loves Star Wars and all things Star Wars, but most techies do. Anyway, this newsletter basically pumps out connections to schools that are looking for certain people overseas. And he may be in where are you right now? Are you in Indiana, or is that?
I'm actually in Mississippi.
Mississippi. Okay. So you're in Mississippi and you've been overseas. So you're giving back to the international by giving out this long list of schools that people can subscribe, and you send it out to them. You're pushing out to a newsletter list and they get it in their inbox, and you're just promoting and what I love about it is you're like, sometimes you'll say on the newsletter, this was just randomly sent to me. Right? That'll be the title, randomly sent to me, and you'll have 3 different schools with their positions listed and how to contact the schools.
Right.
You set up what you should have had years ago. You set up the kind of newsletter or / website
that I would have wanted,
that you wanted, right? I did the same thing. I wrote a book that I wanted to have when I first went overseas because I didn't know what it was. So I write this book, Finding the Right Fit. I finally got it published, and it's taken me 20 years to do that. You have a website, a newsletter, a web presence called Pancake on a Stick that people can subscribe to it, right?
Yeah. And when I was, I started doing this like during the pandemic because I saw a lot of people like really just like struggling, and I was talking to my brother about it, and he's like, that won't be too hard to do. I'm like, no, it'll be pretty easy to do, but I want to make it like fast. I want to be able to do it quickly every week, and I want to make it funny. And I'm like, so I'm going to have like a meme every week. I'm going to have something on there. And then I'm like, I need to come up with a name that's hilarious. And so the funniest story that my brother and I share is this Pancake on a Stick story. And we're trying to get together soon to do this like reenactment, but we have to get 2 other people. So the name itself is like ridiculous. And like every time I say it, I laugh. Like I actually laugh every time I sit down and write the newsletter. I just laugh. And when people ask me about it, they have to smile when they say it. You can't say it without smile. I had a friend call me on the phone, and she was like really distraught because she had taken a contract. I don't throw schools under the bus ever. I don't put anything out that's negative.
I try not to. Yeah.
But she took a contract at a big prominent school and they just owned her at the last minute. I'm not going to say how because people will figure out what school it is. And she was upset and she's got a family and they're supposed to move. And, she's talking to me on the phone. She's really upset. And she's like, can you help me like find a job? Because I know that you've helped people find jobs before. And I'm like, sure. Do you know the name of my newsletter? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, well, what's the name of my newsletter? And she said it and she just like starts laughing. I can hear her laugh and smile on the phone. Right. I'm like, okay, now feel better. And now we can get into it. So that's another reason I like came up with that name. It's just funny. It's a ridiculous name and it's funny. And if I ever get the story down, like whenever my brother tells the story and I've heard it 100 times, my eyes like water, like still anytime we tell the story, but you have to kind of tell it like in tandem because there's like multiple people involved, right? Everybody's got like a character. So
you're not going to tell me the story on here. You're not going to tell us the story. You're going to make me wait.
I'll tell you guys the story, but it's not going to be funny unless my brother's involved because my brother can do all these voices. So my brother left home and he went to university. Now we are from a small town in Kentucky and, my dad, is someone who likes to embarrass people. Like that is his thing. He just embarrasses people. He's from a small town, so I guess everybody got used to it, but it's really annoying. Okay. He does like really annoying stuff in public. So, I always made it a point to not give my dad my phone number to my dorm room when I was in college. My brother was he was like living in an apartment. He had 2 roommates and my dad called and he left this horribly embarrassing message on my brother's answer machine. And it was about how he was going to take our stepmom, who's a very sweet lady, out for an anniversary. And they were going to go eat pancake on the stick, which isn't even a food. Okay. And he's like,
I know.
And he left this message. And these people that live with my brother, they're not from like a small town in Kentucky. And my dad left this message in this horrendous, forced redneck voice. That's all the only way I can describe it. And it was the language was like so mutilated that his roommates could barely understand it. And then my brother came back and they had this message, they had the tape and they're like, what does this mean?
What's he talking? What's this hillbilly saying?
And it was this long hillbilly message. Okay. So then my brother's roommates obsess over this message and they memorize it and they like get my dad's voice down and they start using this kind of voice and this story all the time. And they call people and they just start saying they're going to go out for, that's like a prank, like as we're going to go out for pancake on a stick. And then people just get locked up on the phone. They're like, what is happening to me? Like, who is this person? So like this whole thing turns into this like group of teenage, like kind of like 18, 19, 20-year-olds in Cincinnati, Ohio, is just like this using this all the time as like a joke. And my brother's like, you don't understand. This thing is out of control. He's like, there's like 20 people who are talking about pancake. It's a
movement
that our dad started with this really embarrassing message he left on my machine.
Your dad sounds like a real character, first of all. I love that story because that's the kind of thing that goes on in my life. Some kind of little thing and it grows and grows. I love the backstory because when I see Pancake and a Stick, first thing I thought was I laughed. And the next thing I'm like, oh, this is fantastic. Being overseas for a long time and knowing a lot of different people around the world at different schools, to be able to look on there and see that kind of information at the fingertips, it's a service that you're providing for people. And we just need to get the word out about it. How many followers do you think you have on you probably have a huge newsletter list.
It's not that big. Let me look. Well, I don't usually go with newsletter lists. I try to go for like views and click rates. So right now it's medium kind of stress in terms of people looking for jobs. So every week I'll get about 1,050 like unique people, and about 60 to 75% of them open one or more of the job ads. And then when you get kind of like around April, May, where people are like, I haven't found a job yet, the number goes up. And a lot of these, you don't have to be subscribed. So a lot of these are referrals. So you can see the subscribers versus like the referrals. I want to just get people to sign up and send it. I'm just not a huge fan of social media anymore. So I'm trying to reduce the social media like contact and really just send it out to subscribers. Plus, if I'm sending it out to subscribers and I need to take a break for a couple of weeks because I'm busy, it's a lot easier to do that. I can just send a message. And,
you won't be.
Yeah, and then subscribers are actually also more likely to engage and or to send me information. So I would like subscribers to be like, hey, I think my job, like I'm leaving, my job's going to come up, or my school has a job and we need it filled, which happens like quite often. And so that's another thing I would like to get to is I would like subscribers to send me jobs if they know they have a job open that they're having a tough time getting filled.
This is a great venue for that. Then hopefully we'll have more than my mom just listening, and we'll be able to have, I always joke about that, but at least we'll have some people get on there. Hopefully from bouncing off of listening to us, they'll leave their job, and before they do, they can post with you and let the world know. Because I'm sick of looking at it on Facebook. I am ready to get rid of all the Facebook
I know that
stuff.
You work in tech and I work in tech, but I also have to facilitate problems that happen between human beings with technology on a regular basis. When I was in Korea, it was really bad. The online social media bullying was bad. The social media management between the kids was tough, and they were pretty cruel to each other sometimes. But so are adults. And I have found over time that if you join a community and participate in any way, even if it's just signing up for a newsletter or maybe you join like more of a message board and you read messages in your email and then occasionally jump in and have a threaded conversation. Somehow those things are more positive than social media posting. They should be the same. I mean, like if I get email and it has like messages and I reply to those messages and someone else replies, that should be the same as social media. But with the social media, you have this real time piece where you can sit with your phone and just shoot off messages. When you have to type something in email, generally you're doing it slower and you're thinking more about it. And while you're typing, other messages are coming in and you're like, you know what? Someone else has already answered that. I'm going to move on. So you also are more cognizant of your time and you put more value, I think, into what you're writing. So it's just something I always try to put out whenever I have a chance is that generally advice on social media isn't amazing. You really need to just do your own research, find a community of people that you feel share your same values or your same approach to doing things, and work through that community. Because you're going to get I just think you're going to get better results because you have more buy-in from like the people who are there. Like podcasts, like subscribing to a podcast. I mean, that's a weekly commitment. You're going to download it and you're going to listen to it. It's a weekly commitment.
But you're into podcasting. You're into a lot of techie stuff. I've just found it. And my co-host, Matt, the family guy, and Kent, the cat guy, they're colleagues, they're friends of mine. We fill our time and talk because teachers love to talk. And we found our niche, and it's a lot of fun. I know that you're on an ed tech kind of podcast, and I listen to it because I'm also ed tech, and I was just listening to your one about printing, which is so funny. I mean, our backlog is the elementary teachers trying to print out an entire color printed book.
The tech podcast I do is with my buddy Patrick. We've been actually doing it for probably more than a decade at this point. We've changed formats a couple times, but it's called IT Babble, itbabble.com. Patrick also on IT Babble, he puts out really good like content. And he does product reviews and software reviews, which I can't stand doing. I normally, if I write something, it's going to be more like a rant. So I just kind of save it for the podcast. Or I write up some kind of technical article that nobody wants to read. We really enjoy doing the podcast, and we hope that it's entertaining and useful. I always try to put language in the podcast that somebody could like use at their school to win an argument or move the ball or somehow make a change. Like I try to put the language in there. So if they're like, this is a problem and they need to articulate the problem, but they have trouble doing it, I try to like get it down to where they can articulate it as best as possible. And Patrick is like super positive. Like he's the most positive person on the planet. He's like, oh, we can work with that. We'll fix that. Don't worry. And I'm kind of the opposite. I'm like, this is the worst thing I've ever seen. We should take it out and burn it. So we just kind of, and we used to work together. So I think that's why we have like good chemistry. And I thought that we built a very good technology, like K-12 technology curriculum together. And you need that kind of back and forth. You need that person who's a little bit paranoid and a little bit worried. And you need the other person who's like, this is going to be fine. Don't worry. We'll work through it. You know, you need that kind of cooperation. And I think we have that on our podcast.
You guys bounce off each other really well too. You know, Matt, my co-host, and he's the lighthearted one. Have you ever read Andy Hallam's book, The Millionaire Expat or The Millionaire Teacher? Yeah. So he was on our show, and it was one of our, we've only done like 20 some episodes. And I was asking him a question, and Matt's like, Greg, you need a lifeline here. He's the comedy of our show. And I go off and I interview like I am with you. I interview when we can't get together because we're in different cities. He's got a family. I want to put a podcast out every 2 weeks. Usually we get together once a month. So it's difficult, but I totally enjoy it. And you guys bounce off each other. Patrick, I'm talking about, he was also another international teacher, yes. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Because you and Patrick both mentioned international on your episode, at least on some of the early ones I've heard. You have over 200, but that's really great how you guys bounce off each other and you add in stories about living overseas. And that is great.
I don't think a lot of people realize how small the world of most ed tech is for private schools. So international schools are generally considered private schools. And then there are private schools in like the US and Canada and stuff. But a lot of the same salespeople that I worked with in Asia, I'm still dealing with them or dealing with their boss or dealing with their coworkers in the US. So even though we're not overseas anymore, everything still is very relevant. So we always try to interject it because you do get a little bit of, I guess the word is like cognitive dissonance where people are like, oh, I'm in Dubai. This doesn't apply to me. It's like, no. These big companies that you're using, they're international and this applies to you. Just trust me. If the US passes some rule that cuts some feature off, it's going to cut it off everywhere.
You have the same vendors that you're dealing with. You're talking to the same vendors. You're talking about different time zones. You're getting the same kind of email like you didn't get back to me. And you're dealing with the same world problems that we deal with at international schools with tech, trying to get help sometimes, right? Or get the vendor to come in. And you're like, well, they're not in my region. So we have to set up a region, or the Legos aren't here, or the robotics aren't here, or they're not here yet, or we're having distribution problems and stuff.
Yeah.
So that's a great connection. I just enjoy it because I connect to that when you guys mention it. And hopefully you're opening up other ears because I like to disseminate information like you guys do. And for me, it's all about international education because no one told me about it. So I want other teachers. Our podcast is for that. Teachers that don't know anything about it. You're in the States and you're not happy and you want to travel. Think about this. Here are some things you can do. And before I forget, I have to honor you guys. Right now, I am drinking a Dubai soda water. It's called Star Soda Water. It's just water. So, yeah.
I think I mentioned a few times to Patrick, I'm like, why don't we also just have a beer podcast? Maybe we do it once a month. So I'm going to keep pushing him on that.
Do it.
It might be a little excessive because like the format would be that we need like 4 beers or 6 beers each and we sample them and talk about them.
During the episode? Yeah, that sounds great.
And by the time we get to the last one, the episode probably won't make any sense. People just have to gauge, how off the rails it goes.
Depends on if they're drinking a beer at the same time you are. So maybe part of the podcast would be that they have to drink with you. And if you produce it ahead of time, they can choose their own beer to drink with you. But when you guys open a new one, they need to open a new one. You might start. That's a new idea. I love it. I won't take your idea.
going to bring it up to Patrick. I think we could do it once a month. I think it would be great.
That's a different kind of social networking, socially drinking on a podcast with your audience. And it's going to alleviate all the work that you do during the day, all the techie stuff you have to do. You can alleviate that with something fun because you're about balance too, right? You need to balance fun and work, right? I love it.
So thanks. I'm gonna take that as the next iteration for this discussion with Patrick about a beer podcast. Thank you.
I love it. Thank you very much. And you know what? I'm going to listen to that podcast because I love your podcast that you guys do. And I'm going to sort of bring this to a fold then. I think that's a great segue to say thank you for your time. I know you're busy and I've got to go to another interview right now. But coming to us from Mississippi was Tony Deprato. You can find him online with his Pancake on a Stick. Just Google him if you want to. And thank you very much, Tony.
Thank you and have a great day.
I certainly will. That was a great episode, man. I appreciate it.